Filmmakers are wrong about the Sony ZV-E1, and I'm here to prove it to you. There's this myth out there that professionals won't get any value out of this camera. And you've seen the reviews. It looks cheap, it overheats all the time, it has unnecessary vlogging features, there aren't even enough physical controls on the body. What was Sony thinking, right? I believe the so-called professionals are making a mistake. They are missing out on one of the most important cameras the market has ever seen. I needed to collect enough evidence to make a point, which is why I spent the last couple of months almost exclusively shooting all of my creative projects as well as actual paid jobs on this tiny powerhouse. And isn't that the entire point of all the negativity out there? Let me show you what it is actually capable of. When it released in 2021, the Sony FX3 was a game changer for many of us. While some tried to argue that it wasn't deserving of its cinema camera title due to lack of false color or shutter angle, actual Hollywood said whatever and shot one of the most beautiful movies of the last decade on it. Ever seen this guy? No? Well, you've seen his movies. He shot Star Wars Rogue One, Dune, The Batman, and recently Dune Part 2. Arguably one of the most important cinematographers of our time. During pre-production for the creator, before he left the project to shoot Dune, he made the decision to use the Sony FX3, and the team stuck with it. I encourage you to keep this information in mind for the rest of the video. We're at a stage where high-caliber professionals choose to use equipment you and me can realistically afford. An $80 million movie shot on a prosumer camera. And here we are once more. The ZV-E1 is just a vlogging camera. No dual SD card slot, no full-sized HDMI. Sony has this trend to create powerful cameras and then, a couple of years down the road, put their features into smaller, cheaper bodies. Sometimes you even get some additional functionality on top, and sometimes you lose a bit of that. Some reviewers call the ZV-E1 a mini FX3, which would imply a downgrade from its bigger brother. And I get that thought process, but it's a pretty illogical statement in the real world. Depending on what you're looking for in a camera, the ZV-E1 might actually be the better choice. You see, a camera is just a tool. You need it to serve a specific purpose. Look at the cinema cameras that are being used on Hollywood sets. They're usually fairly large and bulky, and there's a reason for that. You wouldn't want to use a ZV-E1 on a traditional Hollywood production. Then again, you also wouldn't want to use an Arri Alexa on a small run-and-gun project. If we as filmmakers can't shed this all-or-nothing mentality, we'll never be able to break free of all the gear craze. It's all about who has the biggest camera, the most expensive lenses, the largest budget. Maybe it's just me, but I'm honestly tired of it. For simplicity's sake, we'll go with the earlier statement. The ZV-E1 is a mini FX3. Both cameras share the same 12 megapixel sensor. You've heard me rave about this one in my long-term FX3 review. Link in the description below. This also means both cameras share the same low-light capabilities. For this dance performance, we had to work in a small room with very limited resources. The large key light behind the talent was on 1% power in order to not flood the entire space with too much bounce light. I used an f4 zoom lens and was still able to expose the image to my liking. If you've ever shot festivals or concerts, you know how difficult it can be to get proper exposure in uncontrolled lighting situations. Well, this is how close you're ever going to get to being prepared for everything and anything in those situations. The team behind the creator actually stated that they liked the sensor's noise level and compared it to a pleasing grain. That's why they kept it for the movie. Highly subjective, but again, these people are working at the highest level. I've been shooting projects with this type of sensor for over 3 years now. On multiple occasions it has proven invaluable to me. If you need flexibility like this, Sony's video cameras are still in another league. Earlier I said that comparing this to an FX3 is illogical. Other than the sensor and a bit of functionality, it's actually fairly different. It's much more affordable, even smaller and lighter, has a better built-in microphone, and it features Sony's AI chip for smarter autofocus and additional image stabilization features. Hands down, the best feature and something I don't want to miss on any future camera is full autofocus functionality during clear image zoom. This means touch tracking, IAF, and so on. And I'm bewildered by the fact that people hardly talk about clear image zoom on Sony cameras. The possibility to zoom in with any lens with almost unnoticeable loss in picture quality is absolutely astonishing. It is not like cropping in post. There's a difference and you can use it directly on set. A feature I use on basically any of my shoots. That's something the FX3 also has, but it loses all the smart autofocus features. The ZV-E1 does not. While reviewing the FX3, I called it basically perfect. And there's a strong likelihood that many of you could say the same thing about the ZV-E1. That being said, you should be aware of some of its trade-offs and then decide whether they are relevant to your needs or not. Absolutely everyone has been talking about the so-called overheating issues this camera has. It's powerful and has no internal fan to cool it down. I've seen all the tests and they vary wildly. Thing is, I don't doubt that you can get this camera to overheat, but I haven't managed to do so during any of my shoots, and I don't go easy on my equipment. No, I haven't yet recorded an hour-long interview in 4K 120 during summer, but why would I? That's not a test, it's ridiculous. I've done multiple long-form product presentations in 4K 25. Most of my B-roll is filmed in 4K 50, and during the aforementioned dance performance, we did multiple long takes in 4K 100. And no overheating at all. Now it definitely can get warm to the touch, and ambient temperatures will play a big part in that, but nothing close to what is talked about online. What about the single SD card slot? Depending on who you ask, this might or might not be an issue for you. I've been lucky enough to never have experienced issues with my SD cards. I've never had files corrupt on me, and I know a lot of people who've worked in this industry for years and say the same thing. Maybe your experience has been different. Whether this is a deal breaker for you or not is something only you can answer. As a professional who makes his living by creating videos, let me tell you that this is not just a vlogging camera. It's not just a mini FX3 either. With all that being said, I encourage you to think about this critically. I've done this long enough to know what I need and what I can do without. But what about you? Do you need a camera that can record for long, uninterrupted periods of time? Do you like having physical buttons for each and every function? Do you make use of an external monitor regularly? Has an SD card ever failed on you in the past? Then the ZV-E1 might just not be for you. Do you need a tiny camera with all the power you could wish for? A sensor that can practically see in the dark? Stellar autofocus? Uncropped recording during 4K 60? 10-bit 422? Image stabilization? Good battery life? No record limits? Clear image zoom with full functionality? I stand by my statement. This camera is not for everybody. But it undoubtedly is one of the most important cameras the market has ever seen.